stop unloading until this is resolved. Franklin picked up the lamp. We're going to keep moving into our home. He walked inside. Denise followed with Bruno. The door closed behind them. While Franklin brought in boxes, Denise decided to try something different. She cut a small branch from the street corner and wrapped it in a damp paper towel. Then she walked across the street to the house with blue shutters. A gift, a gesture of goodwill. She rang the doorbell. The woman in the blue sundress answered. She looked at Denise. She looked at the small cutting in her hand. Can I help you? Hi, I'm Denise. We just moved in across the street. I wanted to introduce myself, and we don't need anything. Thank you. The door closed. Not slammed, just closed. Quietly, firmly, completely. Denise stood on the porch for 3 seconds. Then she walked back across the street with the cutting still in her hand. By the time she reached her own lawn, her vision had blurred. Judith stood on the walkway front of her ear. Her voice was low and controlled. It's Judith, 14 Maple Ridge Court. I need the community charter poll, Section 12, residency approval. A pause. No, nothing submitted. They arrived this morning with a truck and a large unregistered dog. She ended the call and stared at the house. The peace lily sat on the railing catching light. Something about that plant offended her. It meant they were settling in. It meant they intended to stay. 20 minutes later, Franklin came out to the bookshelf. 3 neighbors now stood on the sidewalk directly in front of his property. The man in the polo shirt, the woman with reading glasses, a third man Franklin hadn't seen before. They weren't blocking the path entirely, but they formed a wall close enough to make the space feel claimed. Excuse me, Franklin said. I need to get through. They parted slightly, just enough to let him pass, not enough to make it comfortable. As he carried the bookshelf past the hedge, he heard the man in the polo shirt speaking into his phone. Yeah, they're still here. No, they don't look like, I don't know, Judith. Says they haven't been approved. Franklin set the bookshelf on the porch. The asphalt radiated heat in visible waves. His boots stuck slightly to the softened blacktop with each step. Sweat ran down his temples. Not one person on this street had offered to help carry a single box. Not one had said the word welcome. A sprinkler across the street clicked off. The sudden quiet made the heat press down even harder. Inside, Denise sat on the bare living room floor with Bruno's head in her lap. Tall windows spilled light across the hardwood. Granite counters gleamed. The garden filled the backyard view. Everything she had dreamed of. And none of it felt safe. The granite she had admired in photos felt cold under her fingertips. The tall windows that looked so inviting from outside now felt like glass walls in a display case. Everyone could see in. No one wanted to see her. She was crying. Franklin knelt beside her. Hey, don't give her that power. She's going to make our lives miserable here. Maybe. He wiped her cheek with his thumb. But this is our home. We earned it. We're not going anywhere. Bruno licked Denise's wrist. She laughed through the tears. Franklin kissed her forehead and stood. Start unpacking the kitchen. I'll finish the truck. He stepped outside. Judith was at the edge of her lawn with the woman in the blue sundress whispering, watching. Franklin ignored them. He reached for the last box. Denise's handwriting on the side. Kitchen, fragile. Mr. Ferris. He turned. Judith was 4 feet away. Our attorney is reviewing your purchase. He believes there may be grounds to challenge it under the community charter. There aren't. We'll see. She didn't blink. In 36 years, this community has never faced a situation like this. Franklin looked at her, at the woman behind her, at the man across the street holding those dead garden hose. A situation like what, Mrs. Pennington? She pressed her lips tight and walked away without answering. But the answer hung in the summer air like the heat itself, heavy, suffocating, unspoken. Every person on Maple Ridge Court knew exactly what she meant. Not one of them would say it out loud. Judith's next move came at noon. Franklin and Denise had finished unloading the truck. The living room was stacked with boxes. The kitchen counter was covered in wrapped dishes. Bruno had claimed a spot by the sliding glass door, nose pressed against the glass, watching squirrels on the fence. For 30 minutes, everything was quiet. Denise let herself believe the worst was over. Then the doorbell rang. Franklin opened the door. Judith stood on the porch with her phone held out, camera aimed at his face. "I'm recording this interaction for the HOA record." Behind her, 3 neighbors stood on the lawn. The man in the polo shirt, the woman in the blue sundress, an older man with silver hair and a golf visor. "What do you want, Mrs. Pennington?" "Your dog." She lowered the phone slightly. "Multiple residents have expressed safety concerns about the animal. He's been barking aggressively. He's unregistered with the HOA, and German Shepherds exceed our community weight restriction of 60 pounds. Bruno hasn't barked once since we arrived." "That's not what I've been told." She turned to the older man. "Ed, didn't you hear barking earlier?" Ed nodded slowly. "Sounded aggressive to me." Franklin looked at Ed. The man's eyes darted to the ground. He hadn't heard anything. Everyone standing there knew he hadn't heard anything. "Bruno is a trained, gentle dog," Denise said from behind Franklin. "He's 3 years old. He's never bitten anyone in his life." That's what every dangerous dog owner says before an attack. Judith stepped to the side of the porch and pressed her face near the window. Bruno was lying by the glass door, tail flat on the floor. "I want the animal removed from the property until registration is complete." "That's not happening," Franklin said. "Then I'll have to escalate." Judith's voice rose. She was no longer speaking to Franklin. She was performing for the neighbors on the lawn. "I have tried to be reasonable. I have tried to follow proper procedures. But these people refuse to cooperate with even the most basic community requirements. These people." The words sat in the air like a sting. "We cooperated with everything," Denise said. "You showed up demanding forms nobody's ever seen. You questioned where our money came from. Now you want to take our dog." Judith ignored her. She stepped off the porch and walked toward the front door, where Bruno was visible through the glass sidelight panel. "Mrs. Pennington, stop!" She didn't stop. She crouched down and pressed her hand against the glass. Bruno stood up. His ears went forward. He barked once, a single, startled bark. Judith threw herself backward. Her foot caught the edge of the porch step. She landed on the walkway, one knee striking the concrete. Her phone clattered to the ground. "He attacked me!" She screamed it at full volume, not to Franklin, to the street. "That dog lunged at me through the glass. He barked," Franklin said calmly. "You pressed your hand against the door and startled him. He tried to break through the window." Judith was on the ground, clutching her knees. Her voice climbed higher. "And you shoved me off the steps!" Franklin hadn't moved. He stood exactly where he had been standing for the last 2 minutes, 5 feet from the porch, hands at his sides, completely still. "I did not touch you, Mrs. Pennington. You pushed me." She turned to Ed, tears streaming down her face. "Ed, you saw it. He shoved me." Ed shifted his weight. He looked at the ground. He looked at Judith. He looked at the porch where Franklin stood, motionless. Then he nodded. "I saw something. Looked like he pushed her." "That is a lie." Denise's voice shook with anger and fear. "My husband was standing right there. He never took a single step." The woman in the blue sundress pulled out her phone and started recording. She pointed it at Franklin, not at Judith on the ground, at Franklin. Judith pulled herself up, limping dramatically. Whether the fall had actually hurt her was impossible to tell. What was clear was that she was fully committed to the performance. She picked up her phone. Her hands trembled. She dialed 3 numbers. 911? Yes, this is Judith Pennington at 14 Maple Ridge Court, Crestwood Manor. I need police immediately. Her voice broke perfectly. "There are trespassers at this address. They have a large, aggressive dog that just attacked me. The man assaulted me. He shoved me to the ground. I'm injured. Please hurry." She ended the call and looked at Franklin with something close to triumph. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. She limped to the curb and sat down, dabbing her eyes with the back of her hand. When she caught Ed watching, she let out a low whimper and pressed her fingers against her knee. The performance hadn't stopped. It was entering a new act. "Someone get me some ice," she called out. "I think my knee might be fractured." No one moved. The neighbors who had stood as her witnesses were staring at their phones, at the sky, at anything but the scene they had helped create. Franklin said nothing. He understood exactly what was happening. He understood what a white woman's tears and a phone call to police could do to a black man standing on his own property. He had seen these headlines. He had attended the funeral. He knew how this particular American story usually ended. He stepped back to the porch and placed both hands on the railing where everyone could see them. It was a gesture no white homeowner on this street had ever needed to make. Denise came outside and pressed against his arm. Bruno whimpered behind the glass. "Should we call someone?" Denise whispered. "A lawyer. Someone from your office?" He shook his head slowly. "Not yet. Let this play out." "Play out?" Her eyes were wide and glistening. "She just called the police and told them you attacked her. Do you understand what that means?" He understood. He understood better than she knew. He had sat in meetings with the police chief. He had reviewed use of force reports. He had spoken at memorial services for people who looked like him. People standing in their own yards, their own doorways when someone decided they didn't belong. He understood exactly what could happen in the next 15 minutes. "Stay close to me," he said. "Stay calm. Keep your hands where they can see them." On the sidewalk, Judith was speaking to Ed in a low voice. She was coaching him, rehearsing the narrative. Franklin couldn't hear the words, but he read the body language. Judith pointed at the porch. She mimed being pushed backward. Ed nodded along like a student memorizing lines for a school play. "Don't move," Denise whispered. Her nails dug into his forearm. "Whatever happens, don't move. Keep your hands where they can see them." "I know." The summer air was thick and motionless. Cicadas screamed from the maple trees. Heat rose from the asphalt in shimmering waves. Sweat ran down the back of Franklin's neck and soaked his collar. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips. Judith sat on the curb phone in her lap, dabbing her eyes. The three neighbors stood on the lawn like spectators at an arena. Not one of them said what they had actually witnessed. Not one of them contradicted the lie. Denise counted the seconds. Each one stretched into something unbearable. She thought about every story she had ever read, every traffic stop gone wrong, every wellness check that ended in gunfire, every front door that opened to a body on the floor. She thought about Brianna. She thought about both of them. She thought about all the names she knew by heart and wished she didn't. Her husband was standing on his own porch, in front of his own house, and she was terrified he might not survive the next 10 minutes. She was shaking so hard her teeth clicked together. A car drove slowly down Maple Ridge Court. The driver slowed at the sight of the neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, then sped up and turned the corner. Another witness who would later claim they saw nothing. Bruno pressed his nose against the glass door and whined. 14 minutes later, 2 patrol cars turned onto Maple Ridge Court. The lights were on. No sirens. Judith was on her feet before the first officer opened his door. She rushed toward the car, tears streaming, arm extended, pointing at the black couple standing on the porch. "They're trespassing. I caught them breaking into this house. I'm the HOA president. I reported it." "Yeah, you bought this home." Denise tried to keep her voice steady. "Lie! They're dangerous. Do they look like they belong in Crestwood Manor? Officers, he even assaulted me." Judith grabbed an officer's arm and sobbed. "He said his wretched dog attacked me when I tried to protect the property." Franklin stood perfectly still. Denise pressed against him, shaking. Bruno whimpered at their feet, where he had squeezed through the cracked door. Not a single neighbor stepped forward. Not one person who had watched the entire afternoon said a word. Judith had already won. The scheme had worked. She had no idea who she had just defeated, or what those officers were about to say. 4 officers stood on the lawn at 14 Maple Ridge Court. The senior officer, Sergeant Garland, had 22 years on the force. His partner, Officer Trent, was 3 years in. Garland studied the scene. A white woman in her 50s crying, knee scraping. A black couple on the porch, motionless hands visible. A German shepherd sitting at their feet.